All right, so looks like Trump is back in the White House.
He is indeed.
And he's not wasting any time shaking things up.
Nope.
Especially when it comes to immigration.
Right.
We've got some news articles here about his appointment of Stephen Miller.
Okay.
To a pretty prominent position.
Yeah.
Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy, no less.
Uh-huh.
So let's
big rule.
Let's dive into this a little bit and
Okay.
unpack what it might mean for the future.
Ooh.
Especially regarding immigration policy.
The choice of Stephen Miller is certainly significant.
I was going to say significant feels like an understatement.
It does.
Especially considering his track record.
Yeah. His track record is pretty extensive.
Yeah, he's been called the mastermind behind some of Trump's most controversial immigration policies.
Right.
During his first term.
It goes beyond just the policies.
Oh, really?
You know, I mean, remember that American Carnage inauguration speech?
Oh, wow.
That was Stephen Miller's handiwork.
Okay, so...
Pretty stark vision to set the tone.
Right from the start.
Right for a beginning.
Not just behind-the-scenes policy stuff.
Right.
He's shaping the public narrative, too.
Absolutely.
The articles you shared lay out his kind of meteoric rise.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
From a junior Senate staffer to this key player in Trump's inner circle. But what specifically did he do during that first term that has got everyone buzzing now?
He was the architect of some really polarizing policies, including the travel ban on visitors from several Muslim-majority countries, and the family separation policy at the border.
Right.
These weren't just ideas on paper. They had a massive impact on people's lives.
So those are two very specific policies that sparked huge debate and court battles. And, you know, it's interesting. The articles also mentioned that Miller hasn't exactly been sitting on the sidelines since Trump left office.
Oh, no, not at all.
In 2020.
No, he has been running America First conservative legal group.
Right.
That's been very active in challenging Biden-era policies.
So basically laying the groundwork for a potential return to a more restrictive immigration agenda this whole time.
I think that's a fair assessment.
It seems pretty clear that this appointment isn't just about picking someone familiar with the system.
No.
It's about picking someone who's ideologically aligned and ready to hit the ground running.
Ready to go.
And then you add in the fact that Trump himself campaigned on drastically ramping up deportations, promising to increase them tenfold.
Tenfold, that's...
1 million deportations a year.
Yeah.
That's hard to even grasp.
1 million a year? That's a lot of people.
And it gets even more intense.
Wow.
When you consider Miller's own words from that Fox News interview, that deportations would start
on Inauguration Day.
Trump takes the oath of office. No easing into things, huh? It's like they want to send a message right out of the gate.
A very clear message.
But what does a deportation machine like that actually look like in practice? What are the mechanisms they'd use to achieve that?
I mean, they have some tools at their disposal. You know, executive orders are a big one. Trump used them extensively in his first term to bypass Congress and implement his agenda.
Like when he imposed the travel ban.
Exactly.
That sparked immediate chaos.
Oh, yeah.
And legal challenges, right?
Big time.
But it also showed how quickly they can move.
Oh, yeah. They can move very quickly.
Using executive power.
That's right.
And then there's the legal maneuvering.
Right.
We know Miller's a lawyer. And he's not afraid to push the boundaries.
He's not afraid.
Of the legal system.
He will push it as far as he can.
To achieve his goals.
Absolutely.
So potentially a lot of court battles on the horizon.
I think that's a safe bet.
And I can't help but think about the human cost of all this.
Yeah.
1 million deportations a year. That's not just a number.
It's people's lives.
Those are families' lives, communities being ripped apart.
Absolutely.
And remember, many of Trump's immigration policies during his first term were met with fierce resistance from advocacy groups,
lots of pushback,
legal organizations, and even some within his own party.
There was.
It's like he's trying to light a political powder keg, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a very volatile situation.
Speaking of potential legal battles.
How
does all of this connect to Project 2025?
Yes, Project 2025.
That sweeping conservative plan we've been hearing about.
That's right.
Now, Trump himself distanced himself.
He did.
From this project during the campaign.
Right.
But it's important to remember that figures like Stephen Miller are deeply involved.
Very much so.
And it lays out a pretty detailed roadmap.
A blueprint, if you will.
For second Trump term. So even if Trump himself isn't explicitly endorsing it,
Yeah.
it seems like the people he's surrounding himself with are definitely taking cues from it.
I think that's a fair assessment.
Can you give us the Cliff Notes version
Sure.
of Project 2025?
Okay.
What are the key elements that stand out,
Well,
especially in light of Miller's appointment?
some of the key points include drastically reducing legal immigration,
Okay.
expanding the use of detention centers,
Uh-huh.
and increasing the number of immigration enforcement agents.
Okay, so
Basically, it's a blueprint for a much more
yeah.
restrictive and enforcement-heavy approach to immigration.
So it seems like this appointment might be the first.
Possibility.
And speaking of Miller's involvement,
Right.
the articles mentioned some chilling details from a New York Times interview with him.
Oh, yeah.
He talked about plans to build new detention centers,
Yes.
likely in Texas, specifically to house immigrants facing deportation.
Right. And that brings us to another key aspect of Project 2025.
Okay.
Centralizing control over immigration policy within the executive branch.
So potentially bypassing
Yeah.
any checks and balances that might exist.
That's the idea.
And this quote from Miller
Yeah.
in the New York Times article really stuck with me.
Let's hear it.
He said, Trump will unleash the vast arsenal of federal powers to implement the most spectacular migration crackdown.
Unleashing the arsenal.
Huh? It's a powerful image.
It is.
Unleashing the arsenal.
Yeah.
It suggests a level of commitment and aggression that's concerning, to say the least.
Very concerning.
It's like they're gearing up for war, but the enemy is immigrants.
Yeah. That's the implication.
That doesn't sit right with me.
I understand.
But beyond the moral implications,
Right.
what would unleashing the arsenal
Okay.
actually look like in practice?
Well, we've already touched on executive orders, but they could also try to influence the budget process to redirect funding towards immigration enforcement.
Oh, basically.
Take money from one pod and put it in another.
And they could pressure agencies like ICE and CBP to implement more aggressive tactics.
Exactly.
So it's not just about Miller's role.
No.
It's about how he's going to leverage his position to influence the entire machinery of government.
That's right. It's about the bigger picture.
Okay, so we've covered Miller's background, his influence on Trump, and how this appointment fits into a larger strategy for reshaping immigration policy in America.
Right.
But there's another piece of the puzzle here.
There is?
This isn't just about immigration.
No.
It's about a broader agenda that's starting to take shape.
It is indeed, and that's what makes this so interesting. Yeah, it's like a spotlight, but it's illuminating a much larger stage.
Right.
And, the other characters that he's bringing back are just as intriguing.
Well, yeah. The articles you sent mentioned a couple of other appointments. They raised some eyebrows.
Like
Tom Homan as border czar.
Yeah.
That's a pretty loaded title, isn't it?
Oh, it's very loaded.
What does that even mean?
It tells us a lot about the administration's priorities.
Okay.
Homan was the acting director of ICE during Trump's first term.
Right.
And he is known for being a hardliner.
Okay.
Even among hardliners.
So more of the same, but potentially even more aggressive.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment.
Okay.
Homan's appointment signals a doubling down on the enforcement-first approach to immigration.
Okay.
And it's not just about who's crossing the border.
Right.
It's about sending a message of deterrence.
They want to make it clear that the U.S. is not a welcoming place for undocumented immigrants.
That's the message.
And then there's the appointment of Lee.Zeldin to head the EPA.
Oh, yeah.
Now, that seems like a pretty significant shift.
It is significant. Well, Zeldin, a former Republican congressman, is known for his skepticism of climate change and his support for deregulation.
So this appointment suggests that environmental protection might take a back seat.
It might.
To economic interests in Trump's second term.
That's a possibility.
So it's like we're seeing this pattern emerge.
Yeah.
A return to familiar faces and policies from Trump's first term, but with the volume turned up.
Turned up.
So to speak.
Right.
It's almost as if he's assembling a team
Yeah.
specifically designed to execute a predetermined agenda.
It seems that way.
And maybe even go further than before.
Yeah, it's not just about individual appointments. It's about a cohesive vision for how the government should operate.
Okay.
And that vision seems to prioritize deregulation, a strong emphasis on national security, and a more isolationist approach to foreign policy.
But with all this talk of unleashing the arsenal and pushing a hardline agenda, I can't help but wonder. What about the pushback?
Yeah.
I mean, didn't Trump's policies face a lot of legal challenges?
Oh, yeah.
And protests during his first term?
Lots of pushback.
So we can expect even more of that this time around.
I think that's a safe bet.
So who are the key players in this potential resistance?
Well, I mean, you can expect strong opposition from Democrats in Congress, as well as advocacy groups representing immigrants, environmentalists, and other communities that could be negatively impacted by these policies.
And what about legal challenges?
Oh, yeah.
What are some of the legal strategies
Well, I mean,
that these groups might use to try to block or delay?
They could file lawsuits.
Yeah.
They could try to get injunctions to stop the policies from being implemented.
It's a very active legal landscape ahead.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a busy time for the courts.
And I guess the big question is, who will prevail?
Yeah, who will win?
Will the courts uphold these policies?
It's hard to say.
Or will they side with the challengers?
It's impossible to predict.
It's like we're watching the opening moves of a high-stakes chess game with the future of the country hanging in the balance.
It's a very important time.
But it's not just a game, is it?
No, it's not a game.
These decisions have real consequences for real people.
Absolutely. Real people's lives are at stake.
We've talked a lot about the policies and the politics, but what about the people who are most directly affected by all this?
Yeah, what about the immigrants themselves?
What are their stories? Their fears, their hopes?
Well, we have to remember that immigrants are not a monolithic group. They come from diverse backgrounds, have different experiences, and hold different views. But one thing they often share is a sense of uncertainty and fear.
Especially now with this renewed emphasis on enforcement and deportation. It's got to be terrifying.
It is.
For families who are already living in the shadows.
Yeah.
Wondering if they'll be torn apart.
It's a very real fear.
And the rhetoric surrounding immigration often dehumanizes.
It does.
And demonizes immigrants.
It makes it easier.
Making it easier to justify harsh policies.
Exactly. It's easier to justify harsh policies.
It's important to remember that behind every statistic, every policy decision, there are real people with real lives.
Real people with real lives.
And I'm curious, from your perspective, what are some of the long-term implications of these policy shifts? What kind of lasting impact could they have on the fabric of American society?
Well, one potential consequence is a further erosion of trust between immigrant communities and law enforcement.
That makes sense.
When people are afraid to report crimes or cooperate with authorities, it makes everyone less safe.
But what about the economic impact? We often hear arguments about immigrants taking jobs or draining resources. But what does the research actually say?
Well, the economic impact of immigration is a complex issue. There's no easy answer. But many studies have shown that immigrants, both documented and undocumented, make significant contributions to the U.S. economy.
So it's not a simple equation of immigrants equal economic drain.
No, it's much more nuanced than that.
It's much more nuanced than that.
Absolutely. We need to be careful about generalizations and stereotypes. Immigration is a multifaceted issue with far-reaching consequences. And it's important to approach it with nuance and understanding.
So we've delved into the political landscape. The potential legal challenges, and the human impact of these policy changes. But there's still one piece of the puzzle that I'm struggling to fit in. You mentioned earlier that Miller was laying the groundwork for a return to a more restrictive agenda. But what does that actually mean? What are the specific goals he's trying to achieve?
That is the million-dollar question. It's not just about rolling back Biden-era policies. It's about fundamentally changing the way America approaches immigration.
So less of a reset button and more of a...
System reboot.
System reboot. But how do you actually rewrite the code of a nation's immigration system?
Well, Miller seems to be drawing inspiration from a few key sources. One is that America First philosophy. You see it reflected in everything from his rhetoric to his legal strategies.
So less of a melting pot. And more of a...
A gated community.
Gated community. But how does that translate into concrete policies?
Well, think back to some of the things we've already discussed. That tenfold increase in deportations, for example. That's not just about removing people who are here illegally. It's about creating a climate of fear and deterrence.
Wow, closing the doors to the world's huddled masses.
That's the idea.
That's a far cry from the image of America as a beacon of hope and opportunity.
It is a shift.
But logistically, how do they even plan to achieve that?
Right.
Deporting 1 million people a year sounds...
It would be a massive undertaking, logistically, and it would likely involve a combination of tactics.
Okay.
Expanding detention centers, like Miller mentioned in that New York Times interview, would be a key part of it.
Okay.
But they'd also need to streamline the legal process, potentially by limiting due process rights for immigrants facing deportation.
So less focus on individual cases and more of a
conveyor belt approach.
Yeah, a conveyor belt approach.
Yeah.
That sounds pretty dehumanizing.
It is a very impersonal approach.
To be honest.
Yeah.
And what about the financial cost?
Right.
Detention centers, immigration courts, enforcement agencies.
Mm-hmm.
All of that has to be funded somehow.
It does, and that's where the unleashing the arsenal part comes in. Okay. Miller has hinted at using executive power to redirect funding, potentially from other agencies, to beef up immigration enforcement.
Robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Essentially, yes.
But even if they manage to pull all of this off, what about the legal challenges?
Right.
Surely these policies would be met with lawsuits and resistance.
Oh, absolutely.
From advocacy groups.
The legal battles have already begun.
Okay.
Miller's America First legal group has been actively challenging Biden-era policies.
Right.
And they're likely to ramp up their efforts now that Trump is back in power.
Okay.
And we can expect other groups like the ACLU and the Southern Poverty Law Center to be on the front lines as well.
So it's like we're entering this new era of immigration warfare with lawyers and judges as the foot soldiers.
It's going to be a legal battle for sure.
But what are the specific legal arguments?
Well, one key argument is likely to be that these policies are discriminatory.
Okay.
And violate the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution. The travel ban, for example, was challenged on these grounds.
Right.
And the Supreme Court ultimately upheld a modified version of it. But the court's composition has changed since then.
Right.
And it's unclear how they might roll on similar challenges in the future.
So a lot of uncertainty about how the legal landscape will play out.
A lot of uncertainty.
I guess the big question is, what does all of this mean for the average American?
Yeah. How will this affect people's lives?
How will these policy changes affect their lives?
Well, that's the thing about immigration policy. It's not just about immigrants. It's about everyone.
Right.
It affects our economy, our culture, our communities.
Oh, yeah?
And these changes could have a ripple effect throughout society.
Can you give us some specific examples? What are some of the potential downstream consequences?
Well, for one thing, these policies could lead to a more divided and polarized society.
Okay.
When we demonize and exclude certain groups of people, it creates an us versus them mentality that can be very damaging.
Yeah.
We could see an increase in hate crimes, discrimination, and social unrest.
And what about the economic impact?
Yeah.
We hear a lot of talk about immigrants taking jobs or draining resources.
Right.
Is there any truth to those claims?
The economic impact of immigration is a complex issue.
Okay.
And there's no easy answer.
Yeah.
But many studies have shown that immigrants, both documented and undocumented, make significant contributions to the U.S. economy.
So it's not a zero-sum game?
No.
Where immigrants are taking something away from native-born Americans?
Not at all.
Okay.
And in fact, many economists argue that restricting immigration could actually harm the economy.
Okay.
By limiting the supply of labor and stifling innovation.
Okay, so the economic impact is more nuanced than we often hear in political debate.
Much more nuanced.
And what about the cultural impact?
Yeah.
How might these changes affect the diversity and vibrancy?
Well, America has always been a nation of immigrants.
Yeah.
And that diversity has been one of our greatest strengths. It's enriched our culture, our cuisine, our arts, our way of life.
But these policies could lead to...
They could lead to a more homogenous and less welcoming society.
So potentially losing some of the dynamism and creativity
Absolutely.
that comes from having a diverse population.
It's a possibility.
Wow, you've given us a lot to think about.
It's a complex issue.
This deep dive has taken us from the halls of power to the courtroom to the streets.
We've covered a lot of ground.
And it's clear that the stakes are incredibly high.
They are.
So as we wrap up, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from this conversation?
I think the most important thing is to stay informed and engaged.
Okay.
Immigration is a complex issue with far-reaching consequences.
Right.
And it's crucial that we have an informed public debate about it.
Yeah.
Don't just accept the sound bites and slogans, dig deeper. ask questions and form your own opinions.
That's great advice. And I think it applies to so many issues facing our country today.
It does.
We need to be critical thinkers, not passive consumers of information.
Absolutely.
We need to hold our leaders accountable and make our voices heard.
Couldn't agree more.
Well said. And on that note, we'll leave you with this thought. How will these changes to immigration policy affect your community, your family, your own life? It's a question worth pondering and one that we hope you'll continue to explore. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.